Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcoucher back for another edition of Thyroid Thursday, and today I'm going to talk about why you don't feel better on thyroid medication. And many times, some people do feel better. If you're really deficient in thyroid hormone, you can feel better initially, but then you can start to, if somebody's trying to optimize your blood levels of T4, maybe T3, you start to have hyperthyroid symptoms, you start to have hypothyroid symptoms, you just don't feel well. You can get a certain level of benefit, but then you don't feel well. So let me get into a couple things. So when there is a drop in T4 and T3 in the bloodstream, that typically causes a rise in TSH. So T4 is the primary hormone that's made by the gland. There's a little bit of T3 that's made by the gland. Most of the T3 is made by that T4 coming into cells, being converted by either deiodinase 1 or deiodinase 2 into T3. If it's deiodinase 1 converted, it hangs in the cell a very short time and comes back out. If it's deiodinase 2 generated, it hangs in the cell for much longer, somewhere maybe around 8 hours or so that T3 is in the cell doing its job before it's released into the bloodstream and becomes part of that circulating T3 pool. The T4 in the bloodstream, the T3 in the bloodstream, both affect the hypothalamus and the pituitary to help regulate when the thyroid gland needs to make a bigger bolus of thyroid hormone. Now, in basal states, the thyroid gland's always releasing some T4 and T3, but there's periods in the day that go along with our circadian rhythm that more is made. And there's times during the day when demand of the body exceeds our basal metabolic production, and the gland and the tissues need to generate more T4 and more T3. But what typically happens as T4 and T3 drop for whatever reason, then what happens is TSH goes up. And when TSH goes up, one of the things that elevating TSH does is it increases the thyroid gland production of T4 and T3. So there's decreased T4 and T3 in the bloodstream. The rise in TSH tells the thyroid gland you need to make more thyroid hormone, some T4, some T3, depending on how much T4 and T3 is in circulation. There's signals sent to the thyroid gland that kind of help regulate how much is produced. The other thing that the TSH does, and I think a lot of people in the functional medicine space don't know this part, is that the TSH has a mechanism where the TSH helps increase T4 to T3 conversion. Now, whether it's just increasing deiodinase 2, does it drive some deiodinase 1? I think that part needs to maybe be worked out a little bit more, but a big part of that is potentially driving that increased deiodinase 2 conversion. Hey, there's decreased T4 and T3 in circulation. So the elevation of TSH helps drive that peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. What's the benefit there? We're taking the limited amount of T4 that's in circulation and converting that to T3, because T3 is the hormone inside the cells that does most of the work. The other thing that TSH is going to do is it's going to activate something called the sodium iodide symporter to increase the iodine absorption into the body, into the thyroid gland, so that there's more iodine inside the gland to make more thyroid hormone. So in summary, as TSH goes up, it increases thyroid gland production of T4 and T3. It does part of that process is to increase iodine into the thyroid gland, and it increases the conversion of T4 to T3. The other thing that's important is as circulating T4 drops, that's another trigger, whether that's because of T4 only or whether that's a result of the TSH or a combination of those two. But as circulating T4 drops, there's an increase in deiodinase 2. That's the primary converting enzyme of T4 to T3. So when we provide thyroid hormone support too early, we're working against what the overall physiology is trying to do, okay? Now, if you feel hypothyroid signs and symptoms, it's probably because there's a reduced amount of T3 hitting receptors inside the cells. If you feel hyperthyroid, there's too much T3 hitting receptors inside the cells, and the body tries to regulate that. especially in what we call a homeostatic state, a low stress state. But when there's an allostatic load, excessive stress load, then the body needs to adapt. So if there's an infection, if there's inflammation, if there's lack of nutrition, the body down regulates metabolism. It reduces T4 to T3 conversion, reduces thyroid hormone production. Some systems can get upregulated to help defend, and other systems get downregulated because they're not important to deal with that stress response. But when we have this cell stress response going on, there may be a rise in TSH, and you may feel hypothyroid. You may have those symptoms, and your medical doctor may say, well, you're within the lab reference range, but you may go to a functional or integrated practitioner and says, well, I like TSH in the 2 to 3 range. You're at 4. They may say, I want it in the 1 to 2 range, and you're at, you're in the 3 range, and you have lower T3 than they like, so they're going to give you more thyroid hormone, maybe more T4, maybe T4 and T3, but they want to give more thyroid hormone in that situation. Is it good or is it bad? Well, if you truly need more thyroid hormone because the gland can't make it, then it may be beneficial, but we don't want to necessarily try and optimize the blood levels of TSH, because what can happen is, if the rise in TSH helps increase T4 and T3 production at the gland, if the rise in TSH helps pull iodine into the system, and if the rise in TSH helps convert T4 to T3, what do you think is going to happen if you have cellular stress going on, you have reduced conversion of T4 to T3, a slight rise in TSH, and a reduced conversion of T4 to T3, and somebody says, hey, I just want to give you more thyroid hormone medication as T4, what's going to happen? You're going to take more T4, there'll be more T4 in circulation, there's going to be more T4 that saturates the hypothalamus, and when that hypothalamus gets saturated, it's going to reduce TRH, so TSH does go down, but you're also going to have an increased activation of your sympathetic nervous system, which, if you're in a cell stress response, guess what's probably already activated? Your sympathetic nervous system. What's already deactivated or downregulated is your parasympathetic. So your gut doesn't work. That's why your cell hormones don't work. Your sex hormones don't work appropriately. As we saturate the hypothalamus with T4 and we see the drop in TSH, what happens? We get decreased glandular production of thyroid hormone. So now, what the gland was trying to do gets downregulated. So in time, we might actually need more thyroid hormone than the initial dose we were given. 2, the sodium iodine symporter gets downregulated. So there's less iodine being brought into the gland to support the physiology. And the third thing is that enzyme deiodinase 2, the primary converting enzyme, is going to be downregulated. So if we downregulate deiodinase 2, there's decreased peripheral conversion of T4 to T3 inside cells. That means there's less T4 being converted to T3 inside the cells. There's less T3 hanging out in those cells longer. That's going to create hypothyroid signs and symptoms. And if there's already a cell stress response going on that's adaptively decreasing conversion of T4 to T3, and now you provide more T4 and suppress TSH more, you're going to get an even greater drop in peripheral conversion. That also means there's less T3 coming from those cells into the bloodstream to maintain the circulating levels of T3. So total T3 and free T3 go down. If we provide that T4, keep in mind, as T4 rises, and if the cells are in a stress response, they're reducing the transport of T4 into the cells. So there's more T4 hanging out outside in the bloodstream. And as the T4 rises in the bloodstream, that also starts decreasing the peripheral conversion of T4 to T, or the cellular peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. Because as T4 builds up in the bloodstream, it signals the cell to slow down the activity deiodinase 2. So we've got multiple mechanisms that create an issue. What's the net? There's decreased, we create an iodine deficiency. And taking the thyroid hormone won't fix that, but it will make it worse. If this is an immune-driven process, thyroiditis is the immune-driven process due to some type of cellular stress, we may actually make that immune-driven process worse. We decrease the thyroid gland's ability to help contribute to T3 production and T4 production. We decrease the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3, and we drop the total available levels of T4 to T3, and this creates more signs and symptoms, and that causes people to want to do what? Add T3 to the problem, and that'll be the next video. All right, if you have any questions, put them below wherever you watch this video. Take care.